Just like in any creative endeavor, there are those in Hollywood who are doing great things. Visionaries who push the entire industry forward. And, unfortunately, there are also those on the opposite end of the spectrum. Those deconstructionists who do nothing but take that which is successful and subvert it into failure. However, watch the entire video today and discover why I and Culture Casino both feel there's a reason to be extremely optimistic. Hello everybody. It is so wonderful to have you joining us today. Also joining us is the one, the only, the magnanimous, and one of the hardest working YouTubers out there. Culture Casino is joining us for the very first time on the channel. Culture, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. I feel lucky to be here. I have.
Well, so do I.
I'm like, I can't believe people want to listen to what I have to say, but they obviously want to listen to what you have to say. Congratulations on your quick growth, my friend. It's well deserved.
Well, the way I look at that is that the interest in the channel is sort of a barometer, right? And so it's telling me when I'm doing well and when I do poorly. That's what the audience does. The audience gives us immediate feedback, both in the comments and the likes, when they subscribe, when they click that little bell that when you click it, you stick it to the algorithms. When people do that, that gives feedback. And when people click in and they exit in 5 seconds, that also gives feedback. And sometimes what you have to do is just get your ego out of the way and say, I'm extremely fortunate. For whatever reason, this is doing well. And because of that, I'm going to take it in sort of a responsible manner. I'm going to be in awe that people want to listen to these conversations, and I'm going to do my best with it. So that's what we're going to do today. And we're going to be looking at something that is a little bit more, well, it's bigger in scope than often what we do. But I promise, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll stick with this, I think this is going to be a fantastic dialogue. So let's dive straight in. Today, we're looking at the visionaries. We're also looking at the deconstructionists, the people who siphon off the successes of others. So we're going to look at the people who pushed forward entertainment at large through innovations, through dreaming, through persistence. And then we're going to look at people who have used those individuals who rose to the top of the Pareto principle and then used their successes as vehicles to sort of diminish what they had done. We're going to start today looking at an excerpt from a book called Milestones in Cinema, 50 Visionary Films and Filmmakers. This is by Mr. David Worth, himself quite the individual, and I recommend people go check this book out. You can go find it at your local bookstore, also on Amazon. Here's the excerpt talking about a film called Intolerance from 1916. This is largely considered to be one of the first giant epic cinema experiences ever created. There is another, but it's quite short. So there is another one where there's a landing on the moon that was, I believe, done in France. That's also arguably one of the first. But this is up there. And let's dive straight in. It says, why is this film visionary? Even though it was produced in 1916, D.W. Griffith's astonishing cinematic vision propelled the language of film decades into the future. His use of huge master shots, extreme close-ups, masking the frame horizontally and vertically, the iris in and the iris out, massive dolly and crane work, not to mention laying out for the audience 4 separate stories of humanity's intolerance, told in 4 different colors through 4 different times in history. The film is truly an unparalleled cinematic achievement and one that has never been attempted again. Repeat that, one that has never been attempted again, even with today's amazing technology. Now, the reason that I bring that up to start off with is because it is amazing to me when we go back throughout the history of film to look at what was achieved with so little by these early pioneers in the medium. I think back to 12 Angry Men. I think back to Citizen Kane. I think back to the era when we did not have really special effects, right? Buster Keaton might have brought forth the idea of stunts, but special effects in terms of CGI and in terms of even the matte paintings that would be your backdrops, a lot of that You can go back far enough that you precede those things. And yet stories were being told, which are, well, they're capturing. They capture your mind. They capture your interest. Culture, what are some movies that you think of when you go back through the history of movies and cinema? What do you think of, even from your own childhood, that captured your enthusiasm and your passions for this medium that now you live in and deal with each and every day?
You know, it's funny because my favorite thing, or the things that grab me immediately, of course, when you're younger, is going to be animation. So I was introduced to this wonderful world of sight and sound through this cinema piece done by Disney called Fantasia. And that early work was incredible, but you can go even earlier than that. And I think that I was fortunate enough to be exposed to, a kaleidoscope of different, cinematic experiences. The thing that always, the thing that will always and forever will have been the thing that changed me and got me completely invested in films was the first Star Wars film. I saw it when I was a very young person in the theaters, right when it launched, when it was only called Star Wars, before it was called A New Hope.
And it needs to be said, this enraptured the world when it came out.
It did, yeah. I mean, it was so epic, and it premiered in my state in the largest possible format that existed, with the best possible audio that could be there. It was like sitting in a halved off or a quartered off basketball stadium, kind of. It was ridiculous. The screen was so wide, it took up like just half the room, it seemed. And, I think that was either my first experience at that particular theater or not. But when you walked into that, room, that was impressive enough. But when that film actually happened, when the scroll came up, or for me, it was the moment the Star Destroyer is pursuing, the rebel ship, that changed my life. I tell people all the time that is the film that A, resonates with me the most. It's the thing that made the greatest impression on me. It's the very first film memory that I have, probably, is that film. And again, I've seen a lot, but that was it.
No, there are moments that define when the horizon of your mind is opened by something in film. And so, looking right now, as you were talking, I pulled up the list, the highest grossing blockbusters of all time, adjusted for inflation. This on imdb.com. And let me say too that there are different ways to determine this number and determine this list. So there will be people who will be detractors of this and say, "Oh no, what you really have to do is figure out the actual cost of the ticket, not the rate of inflation." I get all that, but just as a cursory tool, let's look at this. So, number one movie of all time in terms of butts in seats. Okay, Gone with the Wind, then Avatar, then Titanic. So, say what you will about James Cameron. How's that for a
pretty good?
And then Star Wars: A New Hope, not the new Star Wars movies. It's in fact the original that had the most people going to see it. It didn't have the foundation of an existent franchise to drive people in the theater. And yet what you're talking about, that experience, right? This experiential feeling of being in the theater and seeing something brand new, seeing something that's larger than you had previously ever conceived.
Yeah.
Well, that drove culture, because this was the fourth, and you are Culture Casino. So appropriate, I would say.
Indeed. Yeah, no, this, again, that film, from that very moment, I think I was drawn in forever, enough that obviously, I mean, many of us went and took various courses on cinema. Some of us went to film school and things like that. And one of the things I remember from one of the early courses was just how much we got innovation from the very beginning. You brought up an epic film from 1916. I truly enjoyed the classics in the truest sense, because I got to experience Chaplin and Keaton and many others, right? And what we did, or what we could do, or what we were doing all the way back then, we were doing for no money with no technology, and it was very, very impressive. Chaplin,
and it sounds like the early days of video games. There's a parallel here in that you saw so much innovation, growth, and passion in the video game industry up until the last few decades, when big business and big corporations sort of monotonized the experience, right? And perhaps that's what's happened over a longer spectrum of time in movie making.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You had so many different minds constantly working on, well, in the medium, right? And every forward jump, you seem to define like an era. And of course, we moved from, you know, silent black and white films to talkies, right? Which, you know, put the end of the silent era. You know, they put it to rest. And then you had,
and it put to rest a strategy of narrative, right? That people don't often think about that. And there are very few films that ever go back now into that necessitated strategy. But for example, WALL-E, one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
WALL-E is a Pixar masterpiece, truly, because the first third act is essentially a silent film. And who could have ever seen that coming, right? A children's silent film in the modern era. What an accomplishment.
Was. And it like I said, there are certain films that bring up the, you know, the aspects that you can tell a story without any dialogue. I think there's another example of that right now, and the name of it is falling out of my head right now, but it is, I think it's on one of the streaming services, and I want to say it's Barbarian, but that's not it. But it's something of is it Berserk? I'm not really certain, but there's one right now that everybody's all you know, Twitter pated about, and I'm interested in those types of experimental shows,
the avant-garde stuff.
Yeah, avant-garde. Yeah, and that again, that's always been appealing to me. I mean, and you know, ultimately, you know, it's always driven by one person, at least to begin with, and then everybody kind of, you know, derives their takes from there. Right. And sometimes it's to positive effect and sometimes it's detrimental. But, you know, it took, like I said, I mean, I brought into the conversation early on, you know, Fantasia. Well, you know, the very first animated feature length film, you know, was only made possible because of an innovation in animation, which was called the multiplanar camera. And that particular film vehicle, for animation allowed for, you know, a sense of depth, you know, and you could do things that had never been done before in an animated film, which made it real, which made it more tangible to the audience.
You're talking about a Walt Disney innovation with the, multiplanar.
Yeah, specifically. Yeah. I mean, again, I mean, when it comes to those things, and when it comes to films and television, there's always one singular focal point that kind of like brings us into a new era. And for animation, I mean, that was one of those things. But I mean, consider you can go all the way back to Disney's you know, first appearance of well, I guess first recognized appearance of Mickey Mouse, which had been Steamboat Willie, right, in animation. And that was, you know, synchronized sound, right? And it was crazy back then.
You know, one of the interesting things about that in the current time frame is that investigative reporter for That Park Place, Jonas Campbell, was just sharing with us in our background channels, just sharing with us that Adobe has put out now a new highly advanced algorithm that cleans up old audio and restores it to being just like brand new. And so I have thought now that wouldn't it be interesting, and I'm sure this is being worked on, but wouldn't it be interesting to see some of those older movies, the audio fully restored via whatever this new technology is, in the same way that you would perhaps color or fill in frames from older movies in order to make them more palatable to modern audiences. I'm not advocating that we throw away the originals, but I'm saying, wouldn't it be interesting to hear that now in the full quality where you could hear Walt's original voice just as people can hear you or I in this moment?
I think it would be fascinating. I would never want to part with the original, as you said, but you know, that also changes your experience from, you know, there's something to it to leave something the way that you hear it now. The phonograph sound, you know, the popping and the clicking and all of that occurs when you watch Steamboat Willie now. But to scrub it free of all of that. I don't know. When we started to do digital processing of audio, and again, was another innovation, was the ability to no longer need to produce a physical representation of a recording. You could digitally record something. The biggest complaint that I had way back when was that it seemed that the audio was rather flat all of a sudden, if you know what I mean. So sure. when you first started to hear DDD recordings, where it was digitally mastered, digitally recorded and digitally produced, when you started to see those stamped on CDs, the music just started to sound flat. It's why I think there's a movement now returning to vinyl, right? Especially off of the original masters, if they have them. And that those always sound more rich to me.
And those original masters, are those analog still?
Those are analog. Yeah. If you can still catch, you want analog, absolutely, because you want everything that was happening in that studio before it got overproduced. And that's that's a conversation for something else. But it's again, all of that came about because of someone's innovation. And so we always have leaders there. We have, as people will see here, the conversation we're having about leaders and losers of Hollywood, but they're in all elements of entertainment and everywhere else in the world around us. And like I said, I've often said that you need, in amongst those leaders, you need visionaries. And right now we're in short supply of those, but the visionaries always have the same things in mind when they get started. I think they always share the same paths to success. They always share the same kind of mindsets. I return back to Walt Disney. Walt Disney's path there was a lot of visionary share. I mean, he was all about innovation. That's what we were talking about that as well. Innovation is the thing that moves everything forward. It's the way of approaching something that nobody else has done before. It's innovation. You have diversification in business is incredibly important in that sense. All visionaries, all leaders need to cast a wide net, in all elements of what they're doing. I think Disney and many other modern visionaries share that. Make what you're making the definition of quality. Make it the thing. Make it Kleenex. Make it a brand name. Become a brand innovator. Disney did that from the beginning onward. I mean, even in properties that he lost early on, we could talk about Oswald and things like that. But when he went out and he really decided for himself that he was going to make a go of it, and come heck or high water, he was going to win. He went out and he and his brother created a brand name that we're still has global reach today. Well,
tell me what you think about this. Yeah. It seems to me that visionaries, that one of the unifying factors for people who we might categorize in that way is that they have sort of a hierarchy of interest that's different than the average person by far.
Oh, yeah.
And so one of the things that seems different to me in their hierarchy of needs and necessities in life is that they're highly focused on changing whatever medium or domain they're involved in, even to the point that they're willing to risk the materialism and the benefits of their perhaps cushioned life. You look at Disney, for example, since you brought him up.
Yeah.
He bet everything over and over and over. And for some visionaries, that results in failure and they lose everything. In fact, you could probably say that maybe 90% of visionaries eventually will lose everything, because you can only bet the farm so many times before statistics says that you're going to lose it.
Right.
Luckily for Walt, he lost it with Oswald, and then he was able to make a comeback, and what a string of successes he had.
Yeah.
But even up until this giant bet he made with the Walt Disney World Resort in Florida, I mean, he bought land of equal size to Manhattan.
Yes.
What a crazy thing to do. At the end of his life, when he probably already knew that his life was ending, he makes that sort of a bet and transformed an entire state's economy and an entire state's culture for, I mean, a century, let's say. We're not even close to the end of Walt Disney World, and there may never be an end as far as, you know, we can see in that state and how it impacts things. So talk to us for a little bit, though, about who are the modern visionaries. A lot of times people will critique YouTubers and say, you know, these commentators, they're just negative. All they do is negativity. But who are the visionaries that we can aspire to who are pushing forward the cinematic experience today?
Wow. Well, I mean, obviously, I mean, the name that jumps to mind, we just had a list of the most, you know, most financially successful films ever on the screen. You know, obviously, James Cameron, of course, would be a visionary. Talk about a guy that never gave up or didn't always seek to change the medium. You know, in order to tell a story, this guy's always either waiting for technology to keep up, or he creates new technology. It reminds me of another visionary from a little earlier on, somebody who's a little bit older than Cameron, in obviously George Lucas. I mean, we can always return to George Lucas.
Sure, absolutely.
But it's that conversation around people like that see something lacking, right? And this is true for all people that I consider visionaries, the most successful people in the world. They always go out and they gather up the best minds. When it comes to cinema, George did that. In fact, he was fortunate enough to be traveling in a circle of the best minds, right? I mean, they were his friends. You know, he went on to partner with some of them, in fact, on multiple occasions, Spielberg and others. But you know, and he was fortunate that he picked out a good partner at the time, who he discarded. You know, Marshall was no slouch. And
may have saved the entire process.
I probably did. But at the same time, returning to Cameron waited for technology to catch up. Cameron saw an industry that was flat. He didn't like it. It was literally two-dimensional for him, and he didn't want it to be two-dimensional anymore. So he's like, we have to change the movie-going experience again. It has to move forward. It has to be more immersive and more enveloping. So he went out. He worked with some of the best minds at the time, some people, you know, that understood some large format stuff that was being done in various ways, like IMAX and such. And he partnered with them, and he partnered with some other, you know, revolutionary people to develop this technology that ended up with this new version of 3D, three-dimensional film. And then he further innovated that by creating a different way to film it. I mean, I can't even describe the process. I think somebody more familiar with it would be better to talk about it. But it really did invite, that original Avatar film really did invite the audience into a different world that they hadn't seen before. Everybody had seen 3D before, but not that way.
So when I'm thinking about visionaries from today, some of the names that come to my mind, I think of Christopher Nolan. I think about Tim Burton, Wes Anderson. I think about Peter Jackson. And I'm not saying that all of these individuals have a perfect track record. That's certainly not the case.
No.
But I'm thinking about people who are actively attempting to revolutionize when they pursue a new endeavor. But that's not always the case, is it? It's not always the case. In fact, that's probably easily on the outskirts of the extreme edges. We might say that what's really driving forward movie making and almost any entertainment endeavor at this time is corporate values and corporate interests, and so be it. I mean, we've got to have an economy. We've got to have money being made. Understand all of that, right? But who are the individuals, in your opinion, that, let's say, are on the opposite? They're not visionaries, but they're also not just your standard Wayfair assembly line producers of content. Who are the people who, and this is what I find to be far worse, because you can make mundane material. That's fine, right? You can make the low budget children's material. You can create the B movie stuff that somebody's got to make it. Content has to be made. But there are people out there who they take the successful franchises, they take the successful material, they take the archetypes and the roles and the characters that people love, and they sort of just suck the souls out of them. They're like the vampires of the visionary world. They don't create their own vision, they just take yours. Who are some of the worst offenders in that category right now?
Well, let's start here. Let's start in television first, because this is an easy one. Greg Berlanti can take and suck the joy and quality out of anything he touches. You look at everything he produced at the CW. You know, especially anything related to pop culture, the early comic stuff that he got his teeth into because, you know, Warner Brothers, and he promptly ran down and deconstructed everything that was there. You know, and he didn't do it all right away. Initially, I mean, arguably, I guess you could say that the first season or two of Flash was okay, and you know, Green Arrow and all of that, but I have to say that he's easily one of those people that can pull everything out. And then, you know, you want to get into a large corporate level, you know, because by the way, he's no slouch. He makes plenty of money. But you look at Bob Iger, the weatherman. Iger's probably the example of just acquiring things later to let them be destroyed, because he's not a creative person. He lacks vision. And then he hires people that, you know, either are qualified or unqualified. There's arguments to be made there. That
he's great at facades.
He is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He is very good at putting on airs. And I mean, obviously he rose from being a weatherman, right? a weather guesser, presenter, weather reader. I don't know what you want to call him, but he went from that level, you know, with Aunt Willow, because Willow was also in, you know, superficial media, and rose his way through the corporate ranks to, you know, CEO. And again, all of it was in, you know, by acquiring other people's bits here and there. And then taking the assets from Visionaries. And again, so be it. That's the way the market works. Visionaries produce things, they rise to a certain level, and they gain a monetary value that then the corporations want those pushes forward. The problem that I see is that, like with an Iger, what he does is he acquires the properties, and then not only does he flood the market with those properties that once were special, but rather beyond that, this gets sort of into an anti-truth situation where it's not just that we get the facade of the entity of what it once was, but he gives it to people who actively subvert what it was to make it be the opposite, or to make it be sort of the shadow of itself. Oh, well, yeah, actually, exactly. Or just creating absolutely the inverse. You know, the idea that everybody's wrapped up in the deconstruction of things. You know, it's like bringing in somebody like, you know, and again, you definitely can point the finger at George for, you know, highlighting Kathleen Kennedy to Iger early on, but, you know, allowing for people to destroy properties. I think that's the worst. I think that's the worst thing you can do. I mean, you know, people refer to it as cultural, you know, locusts, or many other, you know, vandals, many other.
Sure, because these are the mythological stories that have driven generations, right? So take America. America is not an old country. It doesn't have the long centuries-old mythologies that you might find in a European country, for example, right? We don't have King Arthur, but we had Luke Skywalker, and that was new, but it was still something, and it went all over the world, and it pushed forth whatever it is that Luke Skywalker is. And when we see on a number of franchises, in fact, perhaps the majority of franchises now, the effort is to deconstruct that which made it special, and then have an expectation that you just need the facade. Whatever's behind it can be utterly and completely different, and it will still be beloved. And that's not true.
And you're 100% right. And I think I recently did a video about this idea, and I've been frustrated by this for a long time. It's this in name only, you know, mindset that we have now.
Sure, it's the glass, but what's in it isn't the same substance anymore, right?
Yeah, yeah. In everything. This is going to sound weird, but I think everything made in the last 8 to 9 years has just varying levels of hollowness to it.
Because it's postmodern cynicism.
Yeah,
postmodern cynicism.
It lacks depth. It lacks a soul. I think that's actually, it's soulless. That's probably the better way to describe it. And it's gosh, it's just disrespectful to the original content. I mean, again, we've had examples of that in, an HBO Max animated series recently, where it's just absolutely mean-spirited and disrespectful of not only the material that they're using, and Scooby-Doo with this Velma thing, but it disrespects the audience. And this is the problem with what's being done now by, again, we can return to Iger and all of his poor choices, but with the leadership he's put in place, they disrespect the audience that built them in the first place, which is exactly the opposite of what Walt would do, or anybody else previously. Because to them it's a vehicle to socially engineer at this point. There's no other way to describe what they're trying to do, but it is.
Well, one visionary who is not doing that, one visionary who's actually pushing against that in a very significant way, is Tom Cruise. Now, he's not necessarily a director, but he's an actor who's returning back to what you're talking about before the last decade, right? Before this postmodern cynicism took over, where everything has to be subverted. There is no objective truth, and you don't have to honor the things which for millennia were part of the mythos, or the storytelling structure. And he's going back and he's thanking the audience at every chance. He's performing his own stunts at the age of 60. He's staying true to the characters that he presented decades ago. What do you think might happen if he continues to be highly successful? Have we reached that turning point now, in your opinion?
I think I've said this more than once in the last few months, and I'll say it again now. I think we have. I think, and I'm going to put it this way. The fact that we have so many people making their own thing now, and so many people pushing back against the modern audience concept that's been thrown at us for a while, I think we have turned the corner. But the problem is, and I'm trying not to choke on my own words here. The problem is that it's going to take forever. This didn't happen overnight. It took forever to get where we are. It took a decade or more. It took longer than that, technically. I mean, it took 20 years for them to turn the corner on things. It's going to take 5, 6, 7 years. We still have material coming into the zeitgeist now that was being written and produced, in 2018, 2019. So that's the other problem, is people don't understand, is that television and film is not a fast process. It doesn't happen overnight. And
at the same time that I'm looking at what you're talking about, this turnaround, right? That's slow. And you might say, well, why is it slow? Well, it's slow for the same reason that a large cruise ship is slow. It can't turn very quickly because there's so many moving parts. It's such a huge structure. So you talk about an entire entertainment economy realizing that their theories have been wrong for a decade. It's going to take a while to get that thing moved around. Yeah. Now, one of the things, though, that I see as being particularly dangerous to stopping this movement is this new idea where actors can no longer play the roles that they wish to play, or that they are destined even, let's say, to play, because they don't fit closely enough with the role that is being presented to them. i.e., if you're not in this immutable attribute when you're born, you can't play this role. And if you're not of this orientation, then you can't play a role that differs from that orientation. I'm thinking of Jordan Peele, even, who has gone so far as he will not hire people based on their ethnicities and backgrounds. Do you find that this is something that is going to become stifling to this effort to get away from what we've seen for the past 10 years? Will this hinder us as we try to move back towards a visionary renaissance of cinema?
You know, if you'd asked me this 6 months, a year ago, I'd have a different answer than I do now. I don't think that that's going to last very much longer. You know, if you return back to the merit of a performer or a writer or a director or anything, which again, that'll be the first place you start to see shifts, as you will start to hire the best people, not based on a checklist. When that's happening, I don't think that'll happen as much. Is it stifling now, and has it been in recent years? Yes. But I think that'll be turned back faster than it was accepted. I truly believe that. And again, I understand, you know, we've got a handful of people that are, you know, that are driven by these immutables, and they're, you know, they're the ones that need to revisit the idea of not being discriminatory.
Do you think there's a Tropic Thunder 2? And if so, do you think Robert Downey Jr. would actually go back to that role?
He said he would.
That would be something.
Yeah,
that would be something in today's time.
I would be standing in line outside the theater on day one when that came out.
All right. Well, fantastic conversation. Culture, final thoughts on this big dialogue we've had about visionaries and those who just destroy that which visionaries create.
I think that I'm going to do something that not a lot of people here do. I'm going to be very hopeful for the future. And despite the fact that a fully laden oil tanker headed towards shore needs 19 miles to stop and turn around, I'd say we're well on our way to stopping the ship from crashing into the shore.
I share your optimism. I share it too. I think there are going to be bumps along the way, and I hope those bumps are very interesting because that helps the content you and I create. Yes. But I think it will turn around. And, you know, the human endeavor is such that there will always be conflict. But this is a failed experiment. It's a failed market experiment. It's a failed experiment in the arts. I think we're going to get away from it. Culture, tell us, where can people find you on this great, big, beautiful web? Well,
you can find me at Culture Casino on YouTube. You can just go to YouTube and at Culture Casino. I'm there. You can find me on Minds, same thing. You can find me on Twitter, same thing. You can find me on Odyssey, same thing. And you can find me at Rumble. So I'm everywhere. It's all Culture Casino. And of course, you know, I do have a couple of other channels that I have as well. But right now I'm just focusing on the main. So, but
when I said that you are one of the hardest working YouTubers out there, I truly mean it. I hope people will go to all of the things that you're involved in. It's a lot. And I hope they subscribe. I hope they enjoy it. You have fantastic content and it deserves to be seen.
Wow. I can absolutely say the same. And I've appreciated your insight and your news, all of your coverage in various ways. And I've been so thrilled that you're on YouTube now. You have no idea.
Happy to join you. And folks, if you enjoyed content like this, make sure to click the like button, hit subscribe, share this out, and stick it to the algorithms. When you click it, the notification bell. That's what we're talking about. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep growing, keep learning, and keep having fun.